Welcome everybody to this webinar. It's the second one in our series on EU trade and the rise of geopolitics. A special welcome, of course, to our speaker of today, Bernd Lange. Welcome to this webinar. Bernd Lange is a member of the Socialist and Democrats Party group in the European Parliament, and he is chair of the European Parliament's Committee on Trade, the INTA committee, and he's chair of that since more than 10 years by now, and also the standing rapporteur of the European Parliament on EU-US trade relations, the topic of today. So we're happy to have somebody such as you here with such an expertise and a long-standing work on trade policy of the EU and EU trade relations, Mr. Lange. So we turn to you and the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and also from my side, welcome to this webinar today. And as you mentioned in the introduction, we are really faced with a big change in the international field of trade. Remember, we based our international trade for a long period of time on the so-called Washington Consensus, that we have really the idea of a global system of international trade based on common rules respected by everybody, and we had quite unique the possibility also to have a more or less similar to a normal judicial process, this appeal system, so that more or less also 90% of the countries member of WTO accepted the dispute settlement mechanism. We had, since the foundation of WTO, also some criticism, no doubt about, so that the question of labor standards, of environmental standards, of sustainability was not covered, but step by step, also some of these elements were integrated in the WTO rulebook as well. So this was more or less the system we are faced with until, I would say, the financial crisis from 2009, where we saw then step by step a change in the behavior of big trading partners. Looking to the United States, there was really a switch from this more multilateral approach to a more domestic focused approach. We had, under the presidency of Obama, really heavy conflict between the Congress and President Obama about the Buy American legislation in the United States, where they wanted to really extend this Buy American legislation more or less to all products coming to the United States. And President Obama made a clear statement that the United States should not give a signal of being a protective country worldwide. But this was, I guess, the last time that this more multilateral approach was really realized in US policy. And with Trump won, of course, it has changed totally. And on the other side, also in China, they changed their policy regarding external trade, because the policy in China really changed from a more focus on the developing side inside China to an export-oriented policy with a clear target to be the world leader, the hegemony in some industrial sectors. You know, this Made in China 2025 strategy more or less agreed in China, when on the other side, in the United States, they step away from the Washington consensus domestically. So two forces stepping away from this Washington consensus, and at the end of the day, of course, this Washington consensus was destroyed, I guess, by Washington, by Trump won, when he established tariffs totally outside the rule book of WTO. So a little bit irony of the history, the Washington consensus is destroyed by Washington. And this idea of having, let's say, really a mercantile style of policy, bringing jobs back to the United States, focusing on a short-term economic recovery inside the United States, and having really protective measures to goods coming from outside the European Union, but on the other side, wanted to export US products, is really quite old-fashioned system, but I guess in the mind of the majority of the Republican Party, but also quite familiar in the Democratic Party in the United States. I call this policy always as homeland economy. So focusing in a short time on economic development domestically. Of course, this has also some policies in the background, the situation in the swing states. We saw it in the outcome of the elections quite recently, so that this is really playing a big role in economic policy in the United States. And this was also under Trump 1. He established steel tariffs against imports from outside the United States of 25%, totally illegal, but having in mind that the situation of the steel industry, specifically in Michigan, was quite under danger. And he wanted to protect the steel companies in these swing states. We had a tough discussion about that with the Trump administration. By the way, all links which were developed between the US administration and the European Union were more or less cut. I remember when I wanted to speak to the USTR, Mr. Lighthizer, we had previous time really good contact to Mr. Froman, his predecessor. It was not allowed for me to have contact, and I had a secret meeting in Washington in a restaurant with some staffers from the USTR. So there was really break of the links, and this, of course, led really also to an escalation in the steel tariffs. We had countermeasures, also 25% tariffs on some products coming from the United States, like Harley-Davidson motorbikes and so on. And after half a year, we increased the countermeasures to 50% tariffs. And then, of course, we started a little bit of negotiation, and then we saw that Biden became president. And I have to say that the expectation was with the Democratic government, the perspective from this homeland economy towards more multilateral partnership was not fulfilled. We had more or less the same attitude, but of course in a more moderate way in the Biden administration, and we couldn't really expect anymore that these illegal tariffs on steel would withdraw. They stay until today. We had some kind of ceasefire with the United States, so that a specific volume of steel could be really imported to the United States without tariffs. But in the last year, European steel manufacturers paid around about 345 million tariffs to the United States because they exported more than this volume agreed on. And a second argument, which is underlining my position that this homeland economy is also really relevant in the Democratic Party, is the establishment of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has a lot of discriminatory elements in my point of view, of the point of view of the European Union, is not in line with WTO rules, which led really also to investment supply in the United States and trying to catch investment out of Europe. And we have clear examples. We have the new Volkswagen factory in South Carolina, supported by $1.3 billion. We have a small producer of green hydrogen getting also around about $1 billion now investing in Texas, HIF, and so on and so on. This is one element of the homeland economy, also of the Biden administration. And then also regarding tariffs, they are not totally against using tariffs as an instrument to protect their own production. Remember, they introduced 100% tariffs towards battery electric vehicles coming from China. So they are using this instrument as well. And of course, even I'm not convinced that on a long term this economic strategy will be successful, but they have more room for maneuver for that because their openness, the degree of openness towards the GDP is much lower than it is in the European Union. Around about 30% we in the European Union have a degree of openness to the GDP of around about 40%. So the room of maneuver in a short time is much higher. And even this homeland economy is established now for more than 8 years. We see that there is still a trade deficit from the United States towards the European Union from 150 billion euro, so a huge sum. And even knowing that the parity between dollar and euro is always developing in favor of the dollar, it is really really an element of Trump's thinking that he should really establish much more of these tariffs to protect the production in the United States and bring back jobs to the United States. By the way, also in Lower Saxony, where I'm from, we have a surplus in trade. We export around about 7 billion euros to the United States and imported 6 billion. So we have 1 billion surplus. And this is, of course, for a lot of companies here in Lower Saxony, quite important. And then the clear perspective for the European Union was that we have to calculate, regardless who is winning the elections in the United States, that this will not change, that the situation of homeland economy will be the policy idea of both parties. But of course, with the Trump 2, we saw that the execution of this idea of using tariffs as the key instrument of trade policy will be used in a much more brutal way than perhaps from the Democrats. And now we saw that Mr. Trump announced members of his cabinet. And in my assessment is that he tried to integrate also the moderate part of the Republicans. So we have three roundabout of the candidates for being Minister or Secretary of State, which are belonging to the moderate part of the Republican Party. But the huge majority is really the Trump style, and also Howard Lutnick, the nominated trade minister, is belonging to this part of the party. And he is, and that's also a danger, not really an expert in European policy. And there is not really an understanding about European policy. And even he made a big mistake in a speech a few days ago, where he mentioned that it would be totally unfair that we in Europe are not buying US cars because they are too expensive, because we had established tariffs from 100%. Of course, that's not true. We have only 10% import tariffs for cars, and this is the WTO tariff we put into the basket of the Geneva WTO basket. So this is some kind of indication how he will act. And I guess he will go ahead with the line of President Trump. He made quite clear in discussion at the Chicago Economic Club, I guess 4 weeks ago roundabout, where he announced 4 things: 20% tariffs for everything coming into the United States, perhaps with some exceptions for important goods not produced inside the United States. Secondly, 60% on goods coming from China, perhaps up to 100% to goods coming from Mexico after the agreement with Mexico is withdrawn. And fourthly, using also tariffs as a political instrument to make pressure against trading partners. And this we have to live with. I'm quite convinced that some of these 4 points will be introduced quite immediately after the 20th of January. And of course, this has serious consequences. And you mentioned the introduction that we expect that could lead really to a decrease of our GDP for around about 1%. So it's clear. So we are exporting to the United States mainly cars. Car parts is a really important part as well. Machinery, around about 12% of our machinery export is going to the United States. Pharmaceuticals and chemicals. And this, of course, is really the core of our industrial world. And if we have really a decrease in possibilities of export, this will harm these key sectors, specifically in the situation where we are at the moment, quite radical. This situation is even worse because of the 60% for Chinese products. This might lead really to a pressure of Chinese goods coming more to the European Union. You know that in China, the domestic demand is quite low, around about 60%. We in Europe have around about 85–90%. So they are really depending on export. And if they have no possibilities in the Chinese market anymore, they will come to us. Also, Mexico might be a problem because European companies are using Mexico as a hub for a production to the United States. And fourthly, the use of tariffs to give political pressures could also have an effect to the European Union, specifically having in mind that Mr. Musk is the advisor of Trump and has also some specific interests regarding the deregulation in the digital field. So, what to do? We are now much more prepared regarding this kind of homeland economy than 8 years before. We improved our toolbox. We have a modernized defense instrument against unfair subsidies, unfair dumping products. We could also counter the 20% tariffs if they will be established with 20% counter tariffs, or half a year later with 40%. And we had really a serious look into the figures, what the damage would be and which kind of counter products we should take under these counter measures. We have a smart list for that. Of course, I can't bring it here to the public, but we are prepared if this will happen. Secondly, we have some new legislation, the anti-subsidies regulations, so that we can exclude also US companies under specific conditions from the European market. And we have an anti-coercion instrument so that we can really use defense instruments, tariffs, reduction in market access for US products, have some limitation for IPR, no public procurement, and some other measurement. If really the United States government would use tariffs as a coercive instrument, and I have really my doubts that this will not come, because under Trump 1, he mentioned quite clearly that if the European Union would establish some regulations in the digital field, specifically also some taxes on digital companies, digitax, Mr. Trump would establish tariffs on European cars. So this link of tariffs as a political measure is in their mind, and therefore I'm really happy that we have this anti-coercion instrument now in force. And fourthly, we have also some safeguard measures so that we can really avoid this overflood of Chinese products coming to the European market because of the tariff policy of the United States. Secondly, of course, we have to look to our industrial policy so that we really improve the innovation capacity of industrial policy inside the European Union, and so that we are more competitive. A lot of elements from raw materials up to bureaucratic hurdles which have to be reduced and so on. And thirdly, I think we should really establish a big network of trade agreements to stabilize the international trade, having in mind that WTO is under threat from the United States, but also from other big trading partners, and we can't really be really aware about comeback of WTO, and therefore we are focusing really on this network of a huge range of bilateral trade agreements. This is not really a positive outlook for the next few years, but I guess a realistic one. So we have to be prepared that the international trade field is much more challenging than before. And in this context, of course, we should, as European Union, also focus much more than before on partners in the global south, so that we have also here stable and fair relations as an alternative to a dominant power, which might be used in an unfair way, their power. Thanks a lot.
We have to thank you for this introduction, particularly putting the challenges that we face right now in a longer perspective of the change of trade policy from the US, another strong trading power since the end of the 2000s. I think that's important to bear in mind. And with your conclusion regarding the level of preparedness of the European Union, you could strike a more optimistic note. I saw that you were quoted in the Frankfurter Allgemeine 2 weeks ago, telling the journalist that the state of unpreparedness of the European Union in 2016-17 was very, very high, or very dangerous, so to say. And I interpreted what you said as you being much more optimistic that we have plans, the European Union has plans and countermeasures ready in case the announcements and threats that came on the campaign trail were put in action by the new US administration. Okay, the floor is open now for the audience, for your questions. Just raise your hand. We can't see, or yes, I think Xenia Matschke was the first, and then Kurt Hübner would be the next. Xenia Matschke is from Trier University, our specialist in the economics department on international trade.
Yeah, thank you very much for that very insightful talk. And so you mentioned the WTO and that it is in big trouble and that we cannot basically hope that this will start working again anytime soon. So I'm wondering, you said that the US trade measures that were introduced by the first Trump administration were at least partly illegal, so at least from a WTO perspective. So I'm wondering, so we can expect this to become even worse, right? So the question is, our countermeasures, are they still basically on the legal side of the WTO, or are we at the stage where we can say basically forget about the rules, we just basically do what is right in order to counter Trump? I mean, this seems to be like an important question. And is there any chance that at some point we can revive the WTO, for example, also with regard to the appellate body?
Yeah, of course, we are convinced that our defensive measures are in line with WTO rules, no doubt about. And also, it's always clear that it's really reactive. We are not really using it proactive, and also the measures, also the safeguard measures, but also the anti-dumping and the possible anti-coercion instrument are really in line with WTO rules. But of course, each party has the right to have a proof on that. I expect that China will go to WTO regarding the anti-dumping, the anti-subsidies tariffs regarding the battery electric vehicles. So we will accept any ruling coming from WTO. At the moment, we have this problem that the dispute settlement mechanism is not working, the appellate body is not working. And we established an alternative, the API, and at the moment 35 members are membered, so that we have more or less the same mechanism like the appellate body in an alternative system. So we have a final decision on that. By the way, European Union and China are members. So if there is a ruling on the battery electric vehicle, we will accept this, of course. WTO is under trouble because of the United States and the illegal measures. And yeah, they are illegal. So the steel tariffs, there's a ruling that they are illegal. And this was really with a harsh critics coming from the United States on the ruling, specifically regarding the definition of national security. And this is also an issue between European Union and the United States, the definition what is national security. And the United States would have really a broad definition. I spoke quite recently with a US senator, and Republican with a lot of influence, and he told me, national security, listen, Bernd, this is the economic development of the United States. So more or less everything. And of course, this is not acceptable for us. So this is also one element which the United States didn't accept in this ruling regarding the steel tariffs. And the second problem in the United States is also another big partner, it's India. You know, all progress we put forward regarding sustainability, regarding e-commerce, regarding some bilateral agreements, also the investment facilitation agreement, which is really important for the global south, are more or less blocked by India, because they have only at the moment one interest, the stockpiling of agriculture goods and the possibility to export this agriculture goods. And this might be really to an unfair competition. So I will go in February to India, trying to help to deblock this situation, because we need for the stabilization of WTO India much more than before.
Okay, thank you. The next one coming in from Vancouver, Kurt Hübner from the University of British Columbia.
Good evening. Yeah, so it's morning here in Vancouver, but still, thanks for a very interesting contribution. I'm following up pretty much how you ended, talking about how the EU is getting prepared for the coming tariffs from the side of the US. Everything you lined out makes sense, I think so, but then it's also very defensive. So to some degree, obviously, you are accepting that we are close to a trade war where retaliation, and that's the core of the policies you're suggesting, moves forward. So when I fear that retaliation, you know, maybe you have to take the bigger picture also into account. This will not only be retaliation, trade war between the US and Europe, but probably on a more global scale. I don't want to get the picture too dark, but there will be side effects. And the question then is also how you're getting prepared for the side effects, getting all the kind of putting up an alliance, putting people, other actors on your agenda. But having said that, there's also what I'm missing in your analysis, and also in the policy preparation side of the European Union, is when you're talking, that's your job obviously, about policies, but then what is about the direction of the private sector? We will see, and we see the incentives handed out or indicated by Trump, a relocation of activities. So it makes more sense, you know, rather than only looking at retaliation. Some actors already in the US, and some may move now there, because you know, they could jump the kind of the tariffs and would produce inside the US. So not only for Germany, it's a kind of European-wide thing. So how will you deal with that? And then last element, you know, I'm wondering whether this Trump too is not also an opportunity to think a bit bigger. And the bigger thing is, as you rightly mentioned, the EU is running, generally spoken, a current account surplus with the rest of the world, but also with the United States of America. Now, from a pure macroeconomic point of view, the flip side of the current account is capital exports. Means we are financing, the EU is financing investments abroad in a situation where there's a lack of investment in Europe. So there should be policies, you have to think about, a bit creative, I think so, and this refers also to another point, policies that make it attractive to invest in Europe. Means you need to have kind of domestic strategies in order to really overcome this kind of capital export. We don't need to export other kind of stuff. We can produce back home, and you need to make the kind of the investment area of the EU more attractive. I know that's not your job in Brussels mainly, but thinking about it, developing a kind of strategy that would combine the measures you were talking about with those other bigger strategies, I think so would make sense in this situation.
Yeah, on the first point, of course, we need a coalition against this policy of tariffs. So we are really in close contact with Japan, which is really an important partner on that, with Canada as well. So let's see how the measures are really, if they are coming, really be established and who is targeted. And then I'm not sure that he will really establish, similar to the steel tariffs, a universal tariff for everything to every country, but let's see. So it's really important to be not alone here, and if there are a lot of countries affected, we will have a coalition to resist this. And this leads also, of course, to some understanding on this smart list of countervailing measures, so that we act together. But the second point, it's really a risk that a lot of big European companies will bring the investment to the United States. And as I mentioned, some of them are doing this under the Inflation Reduction Act, but with this fear to have 20% tariffs on their product, there will a lot of more companies taking this decision. And therefore, we need to really improve our industrial policy. So time for decision. So we have now, of course, the transition regarding green hydrogen, for example. It took 2 years to approve the so-called IPSA project for establishing the infrastructure, the production, and the use of green hydrogen. It's incredible. An investor can't wait under this condition for 2 years. Also, time, bureaucratic possibilities have to be optimized. Secondly, also the support for small and medium-sized enterprises which are not able to bring their production to the United States, so that we really strengthen their competitiveness and the capability of innovation, so that they are really able to have a competitive possibility also with this 20% tariffs, and also regarding our state aid policy. But I'm convinced that state aid is not the only question of investment. It is really the environment, the question of skilled people, the question of research and the network of research. After the Inflation Reduction Act, we changed the state aid rules and offered the possibility to match the subsidies of the Inflation Reduction Act. And we had one case, the battery factory of Northvolt in Heide in Germany. But this was the only case in the whole European Union. So you see, there are a lot of different factors which are really relevant for investment in the field of industrial policy. So we should really strengthen the whole field. Also, the question of access to raw materials is an important point. By the way, this is also not given in the full dimension in the United States. So we have also some possibilities to make Europe active again for investment. And yeah, the investment is crucial. Of course, US investment, but also investment from other countries. We have, as you know, the foreign direct investment controlling system now, and we see that still most of foreign investment coming to Europe is from the United States, sometimes also in areas where we think it should be under specific control. Only a small share is coming from China, but also increased share is coming from the United Arab Emirates and also from other Gulf states. So there is still a big investment inside European Union, and we see at the moment no decrease on that. And thirdly, on investment, we are looking also to give better conditions for investment in the Global South, specifically in Africa. We want to establish a European framework for secure investment, like we have in Germany, the Hermes-Bürgschaften, or some other elements, so that we really can motivate companies to invest in countries where we have trade agreements with, to stabilize the economic development there, so that we have some kind of alternative to the US market as well.
Okay, thank you. Next one is Claudia Schmucker from the DGAP, the German Council on Foreign Relations. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Lange, for the input on the future of the transatlantic relationship. I think we are all a bit worried. You mentioned all the new trade tools that you established, the foreign subsidy regulation, the anti-coercion instrument, and all the possibilities that the EU could react if Trump really implements the 10 or 20% of global tariffs that he announced. The question is, can we really afford this? Because we cannot only look at the economic and trade relationship with the United States, we also have a security relationship, and we depend on the United States for security guarantees, especially the Eastern European countries. So if Trump threatens these kind of tariffs, can we really just retaliate, or would we have to offer something because we depend on the United States as a security guarantee? So even if we think about anti-coercion, would we even get a majority of EU countries who would support that instrument, especially from Eastern European countries who very much need US help in the security area? And the question that's related, if we don't retaliate because we believe we need the US as a security partner, what can we offer? Because we know that Trump is transactional, that he wants deals. We already spoke about LNG. I'm not sure that this is really enough again. We were successful last time, but I'm not sure this will be enough this time. So are there other options that we could pursue maybe? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, of course. First of all, we will talk, no doubt about, even if he introduces this 20% tariffs on all, we will try to avoid any escalation. And yes, Mr. Juncker some years ago was successful with offering some import of soya. Even he has full competence on that. And because of the decrease of Brazilian soya, we had really a bigger share of soya, but this was not based on politics. So this was more on the situation in other countries. So let's see if there is a deal possible. So might be also on some industrial goods or also on some agriculture products. Now, of course, you know, the main interest, offensive interest, is in the United States on agriculture products. So yes, we are ready and we are reflecting on that as well. As I mentioned, we have a smart list. So it's some retaliation measures, but also some measures to offer Mr. Trump to make a deal. So if we could make a deal, it would be the perfect solution. So of course, tariff man and deal maker. So he's both. So, and perhaps he has so much credit given by the Deutsche Bank. So perhaps you can also use this a little bit. Let's see. You see, we are really looking for different ways and the strategy is a more comprehensive one. And also regarding your first point, we have built a task force to look for our reaction. And this task force is really built on different elements. So the European External Service is a member of this task force because it's totally clear that Mr. Trump is not really dividing between security, foreign policy, and trade policy. No doubt about it. This is a merged situation. So the European External Action Service is there, the defense unit is there, and really important, and I'm totally convinced that this will be the major conflict, the digital part is also on board in this discussion, and of course trade policy as well. So we are looking really to a combined strategy internally and externally.
So I might then perhaps add a follow-up question to your answer with regards to the transactionalism of Trump and the options that there might be room for finding compromises, exchange of concessions. Is that a advocacy for going towards something that resembles the phase one agreement between the Trump 1 administration and China? And the follow-up question would be, in case we would head for this kind of transactionalist deal, isn't that another step to undermine WTO rules? Because it's quite restricted, and in order to be recognized as an FTA in the WTO framework, you have to head for comprehensive FTAs and not very specific ones on a certain number, a restricted number of products.
Indeed, we are sticking normally to comprehensive agreements, and this is totally in line with WTO rules, so reducing tariffs for around about 80–90% and have also some other conditions on board. And this is also valid for the United States. And, you know, we had some tough discussions in the frame of the Inflation Reduction Act about agreement on raw materials, critical raw materials, where we want to be clear that we are in line with WTO rules, we want not undermined, and this was not possible to have an agreement with the United States on that. And secondly, also regarding the steel, we discussed for a long time steel agreement, which could also cover much more countries than only EU and the United States. And also here, there was a clear perspective from the United States to break WTO rules and have an, let's be frank and clear, an anti-China component in the exercise. And that's also my really fear that in all the discussions we will have with the United States, this anti-China component is playing a big role. And at the moment, based on the experience we had in the last 4 years, we as the European Union are united that we will not break WTO rules because it's got some evidence that we have an interest. At the moment, we are really based on our import-export for around about 52% on WTO rules. And therefore, we have no interest on a breakdown of the system, and we will not the violator of that. So all these agreements on a lower level with the United States have to respect this as well. And therefore, it can't be a single agreement on a single measurement, which is really totally undermining WTO rules. It could be, of course, that some export or import demand and supply might be then accepted. But for example, we would never accept that the most favored nation clause would really harm with that. That's also sure.
Okay, thank you. Kurt, once again.
Sorry, yeah. using the opportunity, I want to follow up with your statement, Joachim, a couple of minutes ago. I'm a bit skeptical about the idea that Trump 2 will be as transactional as Trump 1. I mean, if you see the lineup, and Lange provided a good kind of insight of the people he wants to have in charge, then you see this time I think the tariff is really the core of his policies, and he made all those kind of promises during the campaign, and I think so he's serious about that. So offering little deals here and there, I don't think so will change really the big picture, and he will be full on terrorist. I'm pretty sure about that. So therefore, going back what you provided as and kind of insights and tools, I think so short term, we need to get prepared really for a kind of attack and see how those things are going. So I would not put a lot of weight on the idea to offer him here this and that and the little things. This will not change the core of his policies. So that's my take on it. So I think so. Reading what will come with Trump 2 administration is very important. Not to be too naive in the sense that we can deal in the similar ways like we did it with Trump 1. This will be different. I'm pretty sure about that. It's more a comment, not a question. Sorry.
Hope is dying the latest. So that's always a try, that's for sure. But as I mentioned, this is really serious. We are sitting together with the different parts, so it's also important to overcome the silo approach here in the European Union, and we are ready. So we can put our guns immediately on the table, so that's for sure.
Yeah, please, as a consulman from Maastricht.
Yes, thank you. Thomas Kontelmann, Maastricht University. I'm interested in the discussion that is going on under the new commission around the need for having a foreign economic policy. And of course, that links with the broader discussion about economic security, about strategic autonomy, about not being naive anymore. So all the discussions that we have already had under the previous discussion. Now, Mr. Lange, in your role as chair of the INTA committee in the European Parliament, I could imagine that there are some questions about that development, that trade is becoming more and more a tool also of foreign policy and security objectives. And I wonder, how you or how the EP more broadly is looking at this development, and whether the EP is also willing to go along with a stronger role of foreign policy players, i.e. the Council, you mentioned the EAS going to play a bigger role. What is that going to do to the trade community, so to say, within the European Union? Thank you.
Very good and complex question, because it's really in the heart of our discussion at the moment. I made a similar question to Kaja Kallas during the hearing. What is foreign economic policy? That's quite a new term, and nobody knows exactly what does it mean. And there is really the risk that somebody is thinking that trade should be a tool, an instrument of foreign policy. And for me, that's totally different from our practice at the moment, and not in line of a social, open, fair economy. We should not use our trade policy as an instrument against China or whatever. So we have really to discuss this in depth. Clear regarding economic security or open strategic autonomy, that we are looking to reduce some problems we were faced with. And these problems are not only based on policy of foreign countries. This was also the question of supply chain during the pandemic, the ship in the Suez Channel, some flooding in some Asian countries. So there are a lot of risks which are really complicated for the global supply chain, and we have to minimize this risk. So trying to find different supplier to shorten perhaps supply chain and so on. There are different options in the framework of our instruments. And this I will defend to all the tries to use trade as a political instrument in the foreign policy. And once again, also in Europe, we a lot of voices to use trade policy also an instrument against China. And this is, for me, totally irrational. We need China as a global partner regarding climate change fight, regarding the question of stabilizing WTO, regarding stabilizing some other international situation. We can't give security to the Indo-Pacific without a cooperation with China, and so on, so on. And therefore, we should really respect the interests of China and also try to find a cooperation with them instead of using trade as a political tool and escalate also in foreign policy with this instrument. By the way, this is also then an interesting question. What is the legal basis for this foreign economic policy? I'm just negotiating with the Commission about the use of the Article 122 of the treaty, where the Commission and the Council can act without getting consent from the European Parliament. They did it regarding the sanctions against Russia, but they did it also with the Next Generation EU concept and some other elements as well. And my fear is indeed that in this foreign policy, foreign economic policy, also some ideas are based on this anti-democratic use of the Article 122. And we are really keen to avoid this perspective of foreign economic policy.
Yes, Moritz.
So I would be interested in another aspect of it. So you also said, okay, it might be more interesting as well to set up a defense through more bilateral agreements. And so I would be interested in what is happening there, what is there in the pipeline in terms of that, and maybe as well more related, because you were as well talking about trade as a tool. Somehow we might use as well trade as a tool, because I looked at promoting EU values through trade. Is this maybe as well a problem in terms of how far we can move in our aspirations to create bilaterals?
My experience is that we are really able to negotiate in fair partnership trade agreements which are really covering a lot of elements, not only tariffs, because also, as the European Court of Justice mentioned quite clearly in the ruling about the Singapore Agreement, elements like labor rights, like environment standards are an integrated part of trade policy, because they have to bring also benefit to the people on the ground and stabilize the environment. And therefore, we have also in our trade agreements the international norms like the ILO core conventions. But these are international norms and not European norms. Also, this is important. And secondly, it's always a question how to deal with our partners. Is this a more finger-pointing conversation or conversation in real partnership for the implementation of these international norms by trade? And I had a long discussion with the Environment Minister of Brazil on that, where she was at the beginning also quite skeptical about our approach, but step by step we could demonstrate that at the end of the day, we have the same goal, and we should work together also in a fair partnership based on trade policy. The problem with trade agreements at the moment, I see more on our side. We have now the Mercosur agreement on the table. It is ready. We have the agreement, and we have an additional protocol with in both interests. Could also make a new statement about the content of this, but it is ready. It could be really finished on the 6th of December at the Mercosur summit in Montevideo. And we see now that France is totally against, and it is let's say, a political question. Could we convince France with some measures regarding subsidies for the agriculture sector or changing the value chain in the agriculture sector to at least abstain? Or are we able and willing to conclude an important trade agreement against France? I have my doubts also regarding the consequences for the domestic policy inside France. Will this perhaps strengthen the far right in France? So it is more a question for us how to deal with this trade agreements inside us. We are negotiating quite intensively with Indonesia, and my tip for the next agreement would be really Indonesia. We have 19 rounds now with some really progress in several areas. Now they have a new president, therefore there was a small break, but we will continue in spring next year. We will perhaps get something even before Christmas on Mexico. So I'm really optimistic that also there the new president has a different approach than the previous one. And we are talking with Australia as well, so that also here let's say 5,000 tons of tariff-free meat will not harm the process of a comprehensive trade agreement. So these are the three countries where we are quite close for getting a deal, perhaps in this next year or the year after.
May I quickly follow up? So in this context, because you mentioned Mexico, and Mexico, well, they are threatened now as well, clearly by the Trump administration, their plans. Did you see as well kind of a development that other countries are now saying, okay, well, we are turning a little bit to the EU as well as an ally, because we understand Trump is, or the US is maybe a threat for us?
Indeed, that's the case. Yeah. So the ASEAN countries are much more open than before. And also in Latin America, there's a strong movement on that. So I would not say thanks a lot, Mr. Trump, but this pressure is really giving us more opportunity. Also, as I mentioned, we were looking now much more to Africa, and also there they are looking quite carefully to our offer and the situation globally. Yeah?
Yes, please, Mr. Weiss, step in.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I have a question, actually, which was induced by Thomas Konzelmann. In the response to him, you referred to this anti-democratic tool of Article 122, which might have been used. Well, this leads me to another aspect of the new instruments, like anti-coercion tool, foreign subsidies regulation, the amended trade enforcement regulation, the IPI, and so on. All of those new tools give, well, quite huge powers to the European Commission. It's the Commission that implements these new legislative tools. And the way the Commission can be controlled, as you know, is by comitology. And here we see that the Parliament has a relative weak position. And when we look to the trade defense measures in anti-dumping and so on, it's always very hard for even the Council to stop a draft measure by the Commission, which the Commission would like to adopt. For example, we have seen it with this anti-subsidies measures against Chinese electro vehicles. There were some member states against them, but was not sufficient to have a qualified blocking majority. So in the end, the Commission is more or less uncontrolled, and we have new tools which have not only a trade policy aspect, but also a foreign policy dimension. So adopting an anti-coercion measure or limiting access under other tools to the market also has a foreign policy dimension. So my question then is, how can we still control the Commission and avoid that the Commission somehow steps into a direction of European power politics, which is not its task, actually?
Yeah, you mentioned also an important point. On the anti-coercion, we changed the decision process. So the decision of an anti-coercion measure has to be taken by the Council, by majority in the Council, so not by comitology. So because this is really highly political, you are quite right. So therefore, we changed the decision-making process. On the other instruments, of course, we as Parliament want to have a stronger word to say, and as I mentioned before, we are negotiating this framework agreement, which gives the Parliament much more possibility for control and sometimes also decision power. By the way, the Council is not really happy about this development. So I got a letter that the Council saying if the Parliament is getting too much power because of this bilateral agreement with the Commission, then perhaps we have to go to the European Court of Justice to make clear that we have to have an equal footing. So let's see. But I think it is not possible that executive is dealing totally alone on this highly important and political perspective in the field of trade. So we have to establish a clear scrutiny and control system.
Linking to that, to the use of or the instruments in place that might be used for geopolitical purposes, and coming back to the link between foreign policy and trade policy, you were skeptical about that link getting much stronger, but don't you expect enormous pressure from the US that point in exactly, that ask us, the Europeans, exactly to go in that direction? You said the anti-China component of US trade policy is gaining in importance all the time. Wouldn't you expect a very strong pressure with regard to export controls on the one hand of European dual-use products towards China, and also perhaps pressure with regard of the EU following the US-American lead on outbound investment control?
On the first, yes, I expect a high pressure to ban export to China. And we have at the moment really a serious problem that the United States is giving pressure to ASML, the worldwide frontrunner of machinery for the production of semiconductor, based in the Netherlands with a lot of supplier in France and in Germany. And they require the respect of US legislation, not European legislation, Dutch legislation. No, they want really to have a certification that they respect US legislation, export control. This is not acceptable, and we have to discuss this with the United States as well. But you are right, I expect in this field a lot of pressure, and also in the field of digital platform as well. On the outbound investment, I'm not so convinced because even the experience of the United States are quite limited. And of course, the system is totally different. In the United States, the investment is mostly taken by investment funds and in private investors in third countries, where the economic interest is much more diverse compared to European investor, where we have mostly companies focusing on a specific purpose. And therefore, I'm not sure that we will follow this way of the United States, even knowing that also the legislation in the United States is quite limited at the moment. But in principle, regarding this anti-China course, I expect high pressure. Also, once again, to this senator, he was also quite clear. This Ukraine, find a way, give something to Russia. This is a regional conflict. The real enemy is China. And this thinking I found in the thinking of a lot of members of parliament, and also of the democratic government in the United States.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Consul.
Yes, if I may ask another question. I don't think there are any other persons in the room at the moment. As we talk about outbound investment, another issue on the legislative agenda obviously is the reform of the inward investment screening. There's a discussion process going on since early 2024 on the instrument. And I understand, some discussions around the instrument, also a recent draft coming in from Hungary that is really very critical about the proposal of the Commission. So how do you assess that discussion to continue in the next weeks and months? Will we see a strongly reformed inward investment regime in the European Union, or are we going to stay with this rather more decentralized system that we have at the moment, where the member states are taking a strong role?
I think the truth is in the middle, so that we need more transparency and more cooperation. Not all member states have established until now an investment screening mechanism, and the information flow is also quite limited, and also the quite limited cases where the European Union or the Commission is making an assessment and a statement on that, and how this is respected by the national authorities is also quite vague. So I think we should really make this cooperation part and the information flow part stronger. But at the end of the day, is a decision. The decision has to be taken by the national authorities. So we will start now with our report. We just distributed the rapporteurship, and I guess at the beginning of next year, this will be the intensive discussion in my committee.
Fianti?
Yes, so my question is regarding China, obviously. So you mentioned China being an important Indo-Pacific partner. I was wondering, is China really involved when it comes to EU's Indo-Pacific strategy? Because as far as I read, China was not invited to ministerial meetings so far, and I don't know if it's being really involved in initiatives under EU's Indo-Pacific strategy.
Yeah, let's see. So I'm really in favor of involving China. And my experience with China, of course, is that they are tough negotiators, but if there's an agreement, they are also a reliable partner. We saw it in WTO, we saw it in some bilateral cases, and we should use this experience and build on. nevertheless, we are aware about their strategic interests, and we are also aware about the violation of human rights. So also this has to be mentioned quite clearly, and in our policy, trying to improve the situation for the people on the ground. No doubt about not accepting this, but you can't really ignore 1.4 billion people worldwide, and therefore it is important to stabilize constructive relations with China.
I'd like to thank you once again for investing your time and energy to have a conversation with us here on topics that will, that's for sure, stay with us for some time and might perhaps, when the first measures are taken, be looked at even more attentively and discussed more widely, and perhaps we're going to have other occasions to continue this conversation. So thank you for coming, for joining us, and thank you for sharing your views, Mr. Lange, and a good evening to everybody. Goodbye.
From my side, thanks a lot. All the best for you.
Thank you.